You're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. As we go to air tonight, news breaking that the United States is reportedly planning to provide air defence, intelligence and surveillance capabilities to a European-led peace force in Ukraine. More on that in just a moment. First, tonight's headlines. Poland's new president faces the heat over a veto on benefits for Ukrainians. Germany and Norway pledge billions to Kyiv. And America's NATO envoy promises no surprises in Washington's review of its force posture in Europe. But for more on this developing story out of Ukraine, let's go live to Kyiv now, where our correspondent Alex Cadier is standing by. Good evening, Alex. So what do we know, and how important could America's commitment be if it's confirmed?
Well, good evening, Aaron. To borrow a phrase from President Trump, this could be huge. It would be the most significant change in U.S. policy in the last 6 months. If you think just 6 months ago, the U.S. had temporarily suspended intelligence sharing with Ukraine in its defense against Russia's invasion, following that disastrous meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump in the Oval Office. But now, reporting in the Financial Times, of course not confirmed by the U.S. government now, yet would suggest the United States is willing to share surveillance, intelligence, reconnaissance, command and control and air defense assets to any European peace force or deterrence force that would be here in Ukraine to deter any further Russian invasion. Well, earlier today, I actually spoke to a deputy head of the presidential office, of President Zelensky's office here, Ihor Brusylo. He is also President Zelensky's top foreign policy advisor. I asked him what kind of security guarantees would Ukraine need. He said it would be a number of things, but this was the top priority.
I would put it in the first place. We will need it for many, many years to come, if not forever. And here we want to have the support of our allies and the United States, first of all, because still they have the best air defense systems in the world.
So, Aaron, the start of that clip was just cut, but actually what he said was the top priority was air defense. That's also what European officials have been saying for months, because European militaries simply do not have the kind of air defense capabilities, namely Patriot batteries and others, that the United States has. And therefore, any deterrence force in Ukraine from European militaries could be vulnerable without that protection from the United States. But we've heard again in this reporting from the Financial Times that the support from the US could involve US aircraft, logistics and ground-based radar supporting and enabling a European-enforced no-fly zone and air shield over Ukraine. Now, that will be seen by many in the presidential office, of course, as a success for Ukrainian diplomacy, for those meetings between President Zelensky and President Trump. But moving away from the politics for a moment, if I can, Aaron, it will also be a huge sense of relief for those millions of Ukrainians living under constant air attack from Russia's forces. Shahed drones, missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, hitting, of course, here in Kyiv, but more regularly on those frontline cities like Kharkiv, like Sumy, like Kramatorsk, like Sloviansk, these cities being hit regularly. This news that the US may support the European troops would be a huge sense of relief for Ukrainians. There is, however, a couple of conditions to this US support, according to the reporting. One, it is contingent on European forces sending tens of thousands of troops to ensure that on the ground the peace can hold. And, of course, the US officials saying that it can be taken away at any moment. But despite those conditions, nevertheless, the idea of a European air shield backed by the United States, a huge source of relief for millions of Ukrainians tonight. Aaron?
Alex Cadier in Kyiv, thank you. And we'll have Alex's full exclusive interview with Ihor Brusylo in the full clip, of course, with that top aide to President Volodymyr Zelensky later in the show. Backlash and condemnation over a veto of benefits for Ukrainian refugees in Poland by the country's freshly sworn-in president, Karol Nawrocki. The move appears to be a major shift in policy and is at odds with the current centrist government's stance and even that of Nawrocki's right-wing predecessor, Andrzej Duda. So as Ukraine's fate hangs in the balance, will Poland remain one of its staunchest allies? Kazimierz Słyszek reports.
Veto. That's the biggest power that a Polish president has. The new conservative head of state, Karol Nawrocki, has used this tool to block a bill on aid for Ukrainians living in Poland.
Family benefits should only be granted to those Ukrainians who make the effort to work in Poland. The same with healthcare.
The president's decision is harshly criticized by both Polish and Ukrainian officials. It's a major shift of Poland's policy of supporting Ukrainian refugees.
Denying support for a struggling Ukraine is contrary to the security interests of the Polish state. Helping a struggling Ukraine also contributes to building a secure Poland.
The veto concerns mainly the 800-plus social benefit, meaning 800 zloty or 180 euros per child every month. It is a substantial relief, especially for close to 1 million Ukrainian refugees living in Poland. Most of them, 61%, are women.
This change has no economic justification. The group of Ukrainian children receiving these benefits is small. In the scale of the entire state budget, these are not substantial funds.
In 2024, the cost of the 800-plus benefit for Ukrainians amounted to 2.8 billion zloty, or just over 650 million euros. And the majority of Ukrainian parents who receive it are employed anyway. So why veto the entire bill now?
This is a political decision meant to give the president popularity among a certain political group.
President Nawrocki represents a much more anti-Ukrainian approach than his predecessor, Andrzej Duda. In fact, he made it one of his election promises in a nod to far-right voters.
He's doing it as a soldier of polarization. The scale of the vetoes, he's vetoed 4 so far in 3 weeks. Andrzej Duda, in the whole time of the cohabitation with the coalition, 18 months, vetoed 6.
But this veto has even wider consequences than just social benefits. The bill included Poland's financing for Ukraine's Starlink internet systems. And while Polish nationalists are celebrating,
if Ukraine wants to have Starlink, then let it pay for it itself. I see no reason why we should pay for it.
The government is outraged.
By helping Ukraine, we keep Putin's army away from our borders, which is in the interest, including financial, of the Polish taxpayer.
President Nawrocki's anti-Ukrainian move may do him some favors among the far right, but they are not the only ones celebrating.
I advise you to check the reactions of the Russian media, which are of course advancing the Kremlin's propaganda. It can only be described as euphoria.
And this veto is a sign of things to come. President Nawrocki, backed by the largest opposition party, right-wing Law and Justice, shows little eagerness to cooperate with the government of Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
The Polish government, is in the situation it's in, got a hostile president of the state, and thereby has to somehow also take into consideration the part of the Polish population that is not exactly supporting this government, and that pertains to Ukraine as well.
And Ukrainian refugees are caught in the middle of a domestic political storm. Kazimierz Słyszak, TVP World.
And as Poland risks losing its unity on Ukraine, other European nations are pledging cash for the war-torn country. Norway and Germany have each granted the green light for billions in aid, and Belgium says it's ready to deploy peacekeeping troops. On top of that, US envoy Keith Kellogg has been visiting Kyiv this week. Marek Steele has more.
As the battle for more Ukrainian territory rages on, one of Kyiv's strongholds, Kostiantynivka in the Donbas, has found itself surrounded on 3 sides. This is the land that Vladimir Putin wants in exchange for peace. But the Ukrainians are not giving it away without a fight. And the Europeans are willing to finance Ukraine's defenses, as they believe that only strength will stop Putin from attacking another European state.
I have announced that Norway's high level of support to Ukraine in 2025 will be continued into 2026. So that means, translated into currency, you understand, $8.5 billion.
A large share of this support will finance Patriot air defense systems, so crucial to tackling Russia's daily attacks against Ukrainian towns and cities, the latest targeting Sumy. And back to Kyiv, where Germany's finance minister confirmed that Berlin plans to allocate 9 billion euros in aid to Ukraine across 2025 and 2026.
No one wants peace more than the Ukrainian people themselves, and we, the German federal government, will help them down this path. It is now up to Vladimir Putin to show that he has a serious interest in a lasting, just peace.
In Odessa, a discussion about security guarantees, with a firm declaration from Belgium.
We are ready to take part in international force with an international mandate. That's something which is also important.
These statements come as Poland is slipping in its efforts to maintain its position as a leading supporter of Ukraine.
Poland does not intend to send troops on a mission to Ukraine after the war ends, but will be responsible for the logistical organization of aid to Ukraine.
Under the coalition of the willing, Europeans are ready to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. But what's important, they will have the backing of the United States. Attacks against Ukrainian cities have not stopped throughout the entire peace process, leaving the Ukrainians no other option but to be skeptical.
The issue of security guarantees is overly advertised, but no one really knows what they mean. And most importantly, no one can answer the question how to make them work. We are all talking about post-war guarantees, but we are not even close to ending the war.
And while a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky is still nowhere in sight, Ukraine has released footage of its new cruise missile. With a range of 3,000 kilometers, the Flamingo brings European Russia within Kyiv's reach. For TVP World, I'm Marek Steele.
America's ambassador to NATO insists any withdrawal of troops from Europe will not come as a surprise to its allies across the Atlantic. Speculation has been building that President Donald Trump wants to draw down the country's European military presence as he signals that his priorities may lie outside of the continent. Our defence correspondent Susanna Jurek reports.
European allies should not expect any surprises when it comes to US troop withdrawal from the continent. At least that's the reassurance the US ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, offered while visiting the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius on Tuesday.
The US is signaling that the voice of allies will be taken into account. And we need to remember that that review of US troops presence in Europe is the ongoing process. It isn't something surprising.
But this comes as little consolation. Since returning to the White House, the Trump administration has signaled that its foreign policy priorities lay outside of Europe's borders.
Mostly the US is right now reconsidering how they need to plan for the global area. That's why they're planning how to create the forces, not only US Army, but also US Air Force, US Navy, in the context of China, in the context of the Middle East. That's why there is a still debate about the numbers of US soldiers and boots on the ground in Europe.
Though it appears that at least some in the US government are putting on the face of a committed ally.
It is impossible to bring peace anywhere unless the bad guys are also worried that we've got a hell of a fine Air Force and a hell of a fine military to back up the peace to begin with.
Experts are emphasizing too that Washington continues to have vested interests on the old continent.
There is no really scenario with withdrawing all of the forces from Europe. And this is mostly some kind of aspect of debate between U.S. present administration and some host nation governments in Europe. When we think about the military, when we think our strategy, U.S. need to be here in the context of their long-term planning of power position in the world context.
Speculations nonetheless persist. In April, allegations swarmed that as many as 10,000 of the 84,000 troops stationed in Europe could be relocated. The rumors gained further credence when the US moved to redeploy troops from the strategic logistics hub of Jasionka in southern Poland, used to transport military aid to Ukraine. The Polish government did its best to emphasize that the relocations are just standard procedure.
The Americans warned us about this and assured us that the soldiers who will be withdrawn from the Rzeszów area and from Jasionka will continue to be stationed in Poland, and that this is in no way a reduction of American forces in Poland or in Europe.
Doubts about the location of US troop deployments continue to brew, and there are those who hope to see a drawdown of US forces across Europe, including the Kremlin regime. Russian President Vladimir Putin is demanding that no Western troops be present in Ukraine as part of any peacekeeping efforts, according to an exclusive Reuters report.
Russia is the secondary problem for US, and US already signaled that it demands Europe to take care of its own defense.
And it is likely that during his first state visit to Washington as president of Poland, set to begin on September 3rd, Karol Nawrocki, who championed Trump during his election campaign, will discuss the status of US presence in Europe with his American counterpart. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Now, direct from Kyiv, here is Alex Cadier's exclusive interview with Ihor Brusylo, Deputy Head of the Office of the Ukrainian President. You can also watch the full sit-down on YouTube and tvpworld.com.
Thank you so much for joining us on TVP World, Mr. Brusylo. You are, of course, a Deputy Head of the Presidential Office here in the Ukrainian presidency, also a key foreign policy advisor to President Zelensky. And I want to start with that. You were in Washington for the recent meeting with President Trump. You were also previously a head of protocol for the presidential office. So with both those things in mind, the way the meeting happened, the protocol behind the meeting, the feeling in the room, but also the foreign policy stakes for Ukraine, how did it go?
Well, thank you for being, first of all, in Kyiv on these important days for our country and for our people. It sends a very strong message. Talking about the Washington meeting, is what I can say is that was a necessary step forward. That showed, first of all, the unity of Europe and the United States. And what President Zelensky brought with him to President Trump is to outline the situation, the real contours, the real outlines of what we have now on the ground. And that was confirmed also by the map that every one of us saw in the Oval Office, in the White House. And President Zelensky spelled out in simple terms the real situation on the battleground, because you need to possess the command of real facts to, manage the real state of affairs. The atmosphere in the White House was very conducive for real talks, for practical actions to be taken. And that outcome was taken by both presidents, President Trump and President Zelensky, to the follow-up meeting with the European leaders. So they exchanged on a bilateral basis about the relationship between Ukraine and the United States. We have something to offer to the United States, what they are interested in. And we, of course, need to ensure that the United States is on board as regards the elaboration of security guarantees, talking about the peace process that we're trying to embark on with the Russians for quite a long period of time. From the protocol point of view, that was a nicely made meeting. Why? Because it was made in a short notice. Everyone came just almost in one day. It took all leaders together in one day. And President Trump played a special role, but of course President Zelensky, with his talent and with traits in the character, also managed to secure the presence of all European leaders. And European leaders needed it as well, because, well, they understood that it's about the European security, first of all, if it is primarily about the security for Ukraine.
I'd like to ask you about something President Trump said, referring to a peace deal, whatever it may look like. He said that he will be part of backup for European security guarantees, but if a deal is reached, he said they're not going to have much more of a problem. He seems to be of the view that if there is an agreement brokered through the help of the United States, Russia will seemingly no longer be a threat to Ukraine. Is he right about that?
Hopefully, yes. This is the main thing, but the main thing for security guarantees to be obligatory, not a kind of assurances that we received one day from the countries of the Budapest Memorandum that was badly tailored and never implemented. The main idea is to have real things on real paper, and that these things are ratified by the parliament of those countries who are ready to join the security guarantees and provide them in case Russia decides to repeat its aggression.
Let's talk about real things. What does Ukraine need? We've heard Mark Carney in the last few days, the Canadian Prime Minister, saying it can't just be the Ukrainian military. There may need to be a need for European or Canadian troops in Ukraine. What are the main priorities that, and not just on a political level, but for Ukrainians, where they can finally live in a country that feels that it has a future secure from that Russian aggression? What is needed practically? Is it troops? Is it more weapons? What's the best case scenario for Ukraine?
Actually, it's everything that you have just mentioned. First of all, it's about air defense, and I would put it in the first place. We will need it for many, many years to come, if not forever. And here we want to have the support of our allies and the United States, first of all, because still they have the best air defense systems in the world. And we have to ensure the necessary number to create the air shield with both air defense systems like Patriots, and then we have developed some technologies in drone interceptors, and they also will be used in striking down any air targets that will enter the territory of Ukraine. For that, we need financing and funding by our partners because we have the capacities to produce more drones that we have financing now. So the technological part is the cutting edge of Ukrainian technology, and we are ready to do that. Boots on the ground is an important element of the security guarantees, and the more countries will be on board with the bigger number of flags, so to say, I mean, well, the participants of this coalition ready to be deployed on the territory in Ukraine, not necessarily on the front line. We are talking about the territory of Ukraine in the west and in the south, for example, where we will need the deployment of these forces that will send a strong signal to anyone in the world that the repetition of aggression is, if not impossible, then is very hard to sustain for the country who decides to do that, because this is the coalition of the countries who will never let it happen again.
Do you think Russian Federation troops, Russian troops, not are capable, we know they're capable, but if we have Estonian, French, British, Norwegian, Canadian troops here, do you think Russia would attack them?
I think that they will think twice before doing that, and this is the main reason. There should be, a fear that it will happen because Russia will definitely attack. That would be a signal to Russia that, think twice before you make your next step. And it's the same like about the NATO-like Article 5 security guarantees. It's not NATO, but the idea behind that is that all countries gather together and within 24 hours they decide what actions to take on the practical side of the matter, how to deter. And what you mentioned, Prime Minister Carney, and his words resonate very much with the society, with our people here in Ukraine, deter and fortify. And he referred those words to the previous words of Gorbachev and Reagan when they exchanged trust but verify. Now, in this case, in our relation with Russia, we have to deter and fortify. And another element is the strong of the security guarantees is the strong Ukrainian armed forces. We understand that it will be on us, on our people, on our professional army to hold the first line, to repel any possible future aggression after the peace deal is reached.
Talking about relationships with other countries, let's move a little bit closer to Europe. The Foreign Minister of Hungary said that the attack on the Druzhba pipeline was an attack on Hungarian sovereignty. Is he right?
Well, not really and not indeed. Well, everything that may happen on the territory of Russia happens there. If it influences somebody of our neighbors, so we are ready to meet and to talk how they see it. Because I don't know what was meant by the words of the Prime Minister, but what I can say now is that the President of Ukraine is absolutely available for the meeting in Kyiv and in Budapest in the nearest time.
To hear Hungarian frustrations, to compensate Hungary for losses, perhaps?
Well, we have a number of issues to discuss, including the one that will deblock our way to the European Union. And the same regards the situation with the energy, with economy, with logistics, with cybersecurity, with anything, because we are close neighbors and we have to build the relations as neighbors and not through mediators like the Russian Federation in this case.
I'm going to ask a question. I suspect you won't have an answer for me on this, but am I to understand that the Ukrainian position is if Hungary unblocks the accession process, Ukraine is willing to reconsider any strikes that affect Hungarian energy supplies?
Well, Ukraine is ready to all practical and fruitful cooperation and meaningful relations. And if the meeting happens, it happens exactly to discuss all issues, including the most sensitive one, with Hungary, with any other country, with Slovakia, and even with Russia.
A diplomatic answer to perhaps a slightly undiplomatic question from me. I'd like to ask you about Poland. Of course, you won't be surprised, TVP World is a Polish broadcaster, and about the new Polish President Nawrocki. Two developments in the last few days. One was the veto on benefits for some Ukrainians living in Poland. The other, which we'll come back to, is a consideration of banning the black and red flag in Poland. What's your reaction to those decisions by President Nawrocki?
Well, the reaction is that it takes two leaders to meet. First of all, again, I will be diplomatic, but in any case, they have talked on the phone, but it will not substitute for a full-fledged meeting. And Poland is one of our biggest allies and partners, and economic partners. So we need to sit down to charter a new program for the development of relations, including those that you have mentioned now. There is the Committee of the Presidents whose composition is to be reformed in view of the changes in our government and in view of the new president is in power in Poland. Talking about the social welfare system, that decision of the president in Poland were taken yesterday, is that I believe that Ukrainians contribute a lot to the economy in Poland. No need to say that we are extremely grateful to Poland for what Poland did in the first days of this war, when every Ukrainian was a welcome guest there, because Poland understands and Polish people understand what Russian threat is. Well, I believe this is a two-way road. If there is the contribution from the Ukrainians who work and fortify the economy of Poland, then there should be also the reciprocal reaction of the new Polish administration. It should be a practical look at what Ukrainians contribute and what Poland is not happy with.
So a very quick one. You would like President Nawrocki to come to Kyiv?
Absolutely. The sooner, the better.
Final one from me. A meeting between President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Will it happen? When? Where? Do you have any details you can share?
I will repeat just the words of President Zelensky, that he is ready to meet even tomorrow. So any day, to discuss any place, by the way, except Moscow. It's a senseless offer because it's not possible to go to the capital of the war for discussions, for talks. And it takes now President Putin to say his word, whether he is ready for this meeting. Well, and from his actions, we understand that he wants this war to be taken forward. That's why we are working now with our partners on the security guarantees for Ukraine first.
Mr. Brusylo, thank you so much for speaking to TVP World.
Thank you for being here.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.